Hi, I'm Lindsey, and I'm talking with medtech industry leaders on how they change lives for a better world.
The inventions and technologies are fascinating, and so are the people who work with them.
There was a period of time where I realized fundamentally my job was to go hang out with really smart people that are saving lives and then do work that would help them save more lives.
I got into the business to save lives, and it is incredibly motivating to work with people who are in that same business, saving or improving lives.
What better industry than where I get to wake up every day and just save people's lives?
These are extraordinary people doing extraordinary work, and this is The Leading Difference. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Leading Difference podcast. I'm your host, Lindsey, and today I'm delighted to welcome as my guest, Brent Lavin. Brent is currently principal at Ironwood Medtech Partners, where they help build the commercial logic into medtech startup innovation from concept through commercialization and exit. As an engineer turned launch expert, Brent has helped commercialize 20 plus 510K PMA products and led the buy side of 4 M&A transactions. So he knows what buyers value beyond the science. With a diverse background from GE Healthcare to CR Bard to BD to now leading Ironwood Medtech Partners, he thrives on helping early stage companies navigate the complex healthcare landscape and build successful companies. All right, Brent, welcome to the show. So glad to have you here today.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks so much for the invite. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, I'd love if you would start by just sharing a little bit about yourself, your background, and what led you to MedTech.
Yeah, so I'm Brent Lavin. I live here in Phoenix, Arizona. I've recently founded Ironwood Medtech Partners, which is my company helping early stage medtech. But I spent nearly 20 years in strategic medtech. And so I originally came to the industry through the engineering function. I was an electrical engineer in product development and innovation. And after 3 or 4 years of that, decided I want to move over into what is traditionally product management. And so through my MBA program and then starting with GE Healthcare, I've spent the last 20 years at this intersection of R&D innovation, strategy, business development, and marketing. And so a really great run. I have been on the buy side of several M&A transactions, and I try to bring all of that experience to the early stage so that, companies as they start out can be building for the future. And so it's been a great journey in medtech, and I've loved it so far.
Yeah. Okay. So many things to ask about, but I'll start here. So, all right. So you're, as you mentioned, building towards the future, and especially with these young startups that might not have a lot of experience in that particular kind of environment, or they're leading their company for the first time. What are some of the things that you see that maybe are pitfalls to avoid? Just like maybe some of the things that you've seen startups struggle with a little bit, and how can we help
Yeah.
them mitigate those risks?
Yeah, there is a lot there, but let me just start by saying there is no linear path. And it is a very circular, ongoing process as you work through those early stages. And we call it the fuzzy front end for a very good reason. And sometimes you need to go down paths to realize that's not the right path. And you need to be comfortable with that. But at the end of the day, one of my goals is to help early stage companies build with the end in mind, because whether you acknowledge it or not, you're making decisions today that are ultimately going to affect how you commercialize in the future. And so at least being able to make those decisions with your eyes wide open and understanding the trade-offs that are going on. And so for somebody that's been at the very end of that process, I can help inform, those early stages so that you make priority decisions and trade-offs, with full scale information.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I love the fact that you highlighted it's not a linear path, and there are a lot of things that go into, of course, the success of a startup. I'm wondering, in your role now, what are some of the areas which you see successful startups really thrive in as they're working with somebody like you to help make them successful from the start?
Yeah. Thanks for that question. I love working with early stage founders that are passionate about their technology, but especially those that realize where they may need to supplement their technical background with more of a commercial mindset.
Yeah.
And so the people that work that I work best with are open to inputs and consideration of other options as they go through that process, because, the famous saying, what got you here is not what's going to get you there. And so while technical innovation is key, that may not lead to an acquisition if you can't tie it to a strong commercial plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So actually, this is an area that I'm very curious about, even in your own journey, is so you started off with that technical background as an electrical engineer, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that as well. But maybe if you don't mind sharing a little bit about the transition or the learning process of going from that as a really good base to also being able to understand the full life cycle and how to make something succeed.
Yeah. Well, let me kind of go back to those engineering days and talk a little bit about how I made that pivot from engineering into product management. And to be honest, I didn't know exactly what I was doing at the time, but as an engineer, I was working with a product development team where we were creating a project. I was in a contract design manufacturing company, and we were working with an outside company that owned a patent for a laboratory blood culturing instrument. So we were their engineering partner. And what I saw firsthand was, unfortunately, this customer at the time did not have full insight into the workflow and how the device was used in practice. And so as an engineering team, we frankly overbuilt many options into the product in order to try to satisfy everybody. And that seemed attractive at the time, but ultimately when we got to V&V, verification validation, and the FDA review process, it was a real struggle to get this on market. Now, we ultimately did, but the epiphany for me was I am really good at understanding engineering trade-offs and working with engineering teams to go through the process of evaluating different options. But I also really like working with customers and understanding what moves the needle and what's the difference between a nice to have and a need to have. And so it was that kind of experience firsthand that led me to say, I want to operate at this intersection and really operate in both sides of that equation. And so ultimately, I decided I needed to get an MBA in order to do that. So I left a good paying engineering job right after I got married, and we moved to Madison and got my MBA. And then, that ultimately led to GE Healthcare and then, continued career in medtech. So thanks for asking that question.
Yeah. Well, okay. So your leadership journey, of course, has evolved over time, as often happens, and you've gone from leadership positions within other organizations to, of course, now leading your own. And I'd love if you just share a little bit about that journey of growth and discovery, maybe some, lessons learned along the way.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about kind of my formal leadership in the, corporate structure and organization. I would say we were chatting beforehand that, I really moved through slowly at the beginning of my leadership from one person to 3 people to 5 people. And as an ambitious person, I always felt like that was too slow. And so, but I think it was those foundational aspects of working very closely one-on-one with people, hiring, deciding who to hire, selection, onboarding, having crucial conversations about performance management and how to put people in the right seat to be successful, all occurred when my leadership span was frankly smaller than probably I was hoping it would be. But at the proper time, my leadership expanded very quickly from 5 to 7 and ultimately 22 people within about an 18-month period. And if I had not had those slow steps along the way, I don't think I would have been ready for that. And I would have struggled. And so even though my ambition was high, the pace was just right in order to be successful in that. Now to your second part of the question of, how do you then transition to this new role? That has been a learning experience, and I'm not sure I have it mastered, but it is all about influence. And so, leadership, even in a formal organization, while you can be connected on the org chart, ultimately boils down to influence. And so my goal is to influence early stage companies to understand the trade-offs that they're making and hopefully help them chart the best path forward for the goal that they have, individually. Every company is built differently. And so I try to channel what their goals are into my recommendations.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned something that is brought up often, but I think it's a concept that would be worth diving into, and that's the concept of the right seat. And I would love if you would share a little bit more about your philosophy behind that. And so, as a leader, too, if you know that there's perhaps somebody who's a great fit for your organization but isn't in the right seat, how do you help make that happen?
Yeah, so this is back to the seminal Jim Collins book, get the right people on the bus and then get them in the right seat, correct? And
Mhm.
so I always tried to select the person first and then find the opportunity. And there are times where you need to pivot people. So let me tell a quick anecdote about, a situation where we had somebody on my team, and this person had progressed through different product management roles, but this person also had a project management background and was really passionate about project management and brought those skill sets to product management. But they are different, and that her passion was in project management. And so I knew of some upcoming and different opportunities in the organization that would be very project management focused. And that position was not even on the org chart at the time. But as I had discussions and understood that was becoming a reality, then I turned and offered that to the person, and ultimately they took that new opportunity. And so it's really understanding really their long term goals, as well as their strengths, their natural strengths, not just where they're operating, but what their natural strengths are, and then sometimes even creating an opportunity for them.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And so, okay, so you've had kind of a really cool opportunity to get a really good look into some of these startup companies who, their founders might not be in a place where they're able to necessarily hire a whole bunch of people right away. How can you come in and support them when they're, say, like really young, maybe pre-seed, trying to figure out what the next right step is, and able to sort of help lead them also in that transition of, perhaps single founder to also a leader of a company?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm early in that journey, right? And so maybe not some specific examples around that. But certainly, again, leadership is influence. And, I try to understand as a leader of people in an organization, what everybody's goals are, personal and professional goals are, and then match, again, what I can do to their interests. And so when you talk about early stage CEOs, sometimes it's just a matter of listening as an unbiased outside observer who has no money in the company. And so it can just be providing perspective from years of experience and asking insightful questions, even before there's a relationship, a business relationship between, my company and theirs. And the goal is to help everybody be successful. Like, I'm a passionate medtech leader that wants, these innovations to reach market. And so people have lifted me up along the way. And if I can do that just in conversations and mentorship, certainly willing to do that and have done that. But as, a CEO transitions then into seed and series A, just providing, again, leadership perspective from, my corporate experience can be helpful, because ultimately people are not going to do things exactly the same way that you've done them as an individual contributor.
Mm.
And you have to become comfortable with allowing people, giving people the guardrails, and then allowing them to operate in their own style to achieve the results that you've laid out for them.
Mm. So, yeah, and that's been something that's been talked about quite a bit, is that art of delegating. And how do you give your people the right guardrails without making it so narrow that it feels like you're kind of micromanaging? But you have to maintain culture and brand, like tone and the way that you speak. So, what are some strategies or tips that you might have for a leader who is in the position, needs to delegate? This is maybe a first time. It's a little bit hard to let go of the baby, as it were. So,
Yeah.
so how do you help
Yeah.
them navigate that?
Yeah. I would go back to my own experience where, I probably didn't do this the best the very first time that I had people on my team and was delegating. And I would say that most high achievers struggle with delegation for the first time because people are going to do things in a different way than you did. And I tried to teach my way. But as I grew and expanded and got, mentorship and learned through that process, I started to go, higher on the ladder to, values and culture and expectations to your point before. So as a leader, you have to be consistent
Mm.
and just unending in your communication of expectations, values, and standards, and then hold people to those. And so I say this often. I live in South Chandler, Arizona, and Scottsdale is maybe 40 minutes away. A new leader would say, you got to go up to 101 and you take exit this and that to get to the coffee shop. Where as I grew more comfortable and confident, I would say, we're going to meet at this coffee shop in Chandler. And if they wanted to take surface streets and hit all the stoplights, so be it. And
Mhm.
so you got to become comfortable with that. But at the same time, our standard is we're going to meet at this coffee shop at 11 o'clock sharp, and I expect you to be there.
That's a great analogy. I love the way you put that. Thanks for sharing it. Yeah, that's a really interesting way of thinking about it. Is there's many avenues to getting something done correctly and to meet those expectations that you set forth, but there can also be room for creativity on how that's done, how that's accomplished.
Yeah, one of the team values that I had with my most recent team was around this idea of play to win.
Mm.
And over time, I actually adjusted that with some feedback and some further, kind of study on leadership toward striving for excellence.
Mhm.
And so I think the play to win was a little bit narrow in that you can't always control everything around you. And winning is an outcome that may be dependent on some other factors that you can't influence. And so that was a little bit narrow and too outcome focused, but striving for excellence was something that we could talk about daily. And you may not win, but as long as you strive for excellence in whatever we're asking you to do, like that's the standard. And so that became a lot more robust, I would say, in the conversations that we had around setting and ensuring expectations.
Yes, I love that. Excellence over perfection, especially for those of us who are what I would fondly refer to as a recovering perfectionist. So
Mhm.
I love that.
Yeah, it's a present tense recovering, right?
Yeah.
Because we're never fully recovered. But
That's
no,
right.
it's good.
That's right. Absolutely. No, I love that. So, just out of pure curiosity, when you were,
Yeah.
say, I don't know, 7, 8 years old, could you have possibly imagined becoming an engineer and or doing what you do now, which is so much even more robust?
Oh my gosh, Lindsay, I love this question because I couldn't. I didn't. I grew up in small town USA, and I was really focused on being the best at any single sport I could play. I was just a ball kid but I loved entrepreneurship. And it's funny you say this because I think in high school, they had those like, what are you going to do when you grow up? I wanted to own a sports bar.
Oh,
And so like I wanted to help serve good food and just have a lot of TVs around and be an entertainment spot. But I just kind of had that entrepreneurial, itch. And so I pretty well knew I was going to be an engineer just because I was good at technical things and I loved it. Like it wasn't work to me, but I didn't even understand what med tech was. And I was 22 years old in my first engineering job. I was 6 months into the job and I ended up in the ER on the weekend and excruciating abdominal pain. And they ran a CT scan and they found the problem. They relieved the symptoms. They sent me home and they said, you need to see the surgeon on Monday morning. Not really understanding what was going on, but I distinctly remember being in that surgeon's office the next week and seeing the axial image of the CT scan on the light box, like the physical light box back then. And I was fascinated. I was fascinated that they chopped my body like a loaf of bread. And within about 30 seconds, they could identify the issue. And, the surgeon said, you have this recurrent diaphragmatic hernia and you're going to be in surgery in 2 days. And so I was not scared. I was more fascinated than anything. And that is what crystallized, my need to get into medtech. I didn't even know it existed, but I said, I want to go do that. And if you fast forward about 5 years, there I was working for GE Healthcare, the maker of those CT scanners. And so I think medtech is really hard. It is not the most glamorous industry. So we all need that why. And for me, again, that Monday morning in the surgeon's office is my why.
I love that. Yeah. And I love that that's your why. And sort of a follow-up question to that then is, are there any moments that stand out to you along your journey being in medtech that particularly reinforced to you since making that decision, say, that you are in the right place at the right time?
Yeah, and I don't mind talking about this. I'll tell this other story. About 12 or 13 years ago, I ended up learning that I had an autoimmune condition. And if you fast forward, I was on some pharmaceuticals and I've recovered and I'm all back to normal, but I still live with that. But you go to today and there are neuromodulation solutions that are addressing autoimmune conditions. And so we're now giving patients a choice between a device-based intervention and a pharmaceutical intervention or a pharmaceutical treatment. And I did not love those pharmaceuticals. They had certain side effects and I didn't want to be on them the rest of my life. Now I've weaned off of most of them, but patients today are getting an option for a device-based intervention. And so that's what medtech is about. And so when I hear stories of like this, I'm like, I'm exactly in the right place. And so there's so much opportunity for us to innovate and impact patient lives, whether that's ourselves, our family members or people we may never meet.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that story. It's incredible to see. I think one of the best parts about being in the industry is getting to feel hope on a daily basis. Yeah, because there's always something new coming out. These, like you said, medtech is really hard. There are a lot of really tough days, sometimes very not glamorous. And if you have that why, that helps pull you through those days. But I really love what you touched on there of how those innovations that are coming through is reason for hope and just optimism again, especially in a world that needs that really badly.
Yeah, I think it's easy to be cynical about healthcare, but I guess I choose hope. And yes, we have some structural things that we need to work through. Yes, we have a reimbursement climate or a regulatory structure. But to me, that's just a great puzzle. And the innovations that do have an impact, not only on healthcare patients, but also economics are the ones that are going to win. And so I don't mind that at the high bar, and so that just means that we need to all be a little bit better, 1% better, and continue to make a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so great. I really love that. Okay. So pivoting the conversation a little bit just for fun. Imagine that you're to be offered $1 million to teach a masterclass on anything you want. It can be within your industry, but it doesn't have to be. What would you choose to teach?
Yeah, I love that you asked this question, and I could go a lot of different directions. I think I'm going to say, I would love to teach the process of structured customer insights. And so I'm thinking back to the whiteboard of an early stage and then throughout the journey of a company. But I think there's a big gap between asking questions to learn and asking the best questions that can ultimately influence your business decision. And so it's not only what you're asking, it's how you're asking it, why you're asking it, and then doing the proper follow-up during the conversation in order to learn the true insight. And so I love baking and I love barbecue, maybe back to my, sports bar dreams. But I think there's a big difference between following the recipe of a baking, process and doing barbecue, which is very process oriented and no two things are the same. And so I think we need to approach customer insights a little bit more like barbecue, where, you definitely have a goal and a process, but you're willing to adjust and make the changes as you learn in order to affect, the business decisions.
Yeah. Okay. I really like that. I also like the illustration of the barbecue analogy. That's fun. So, okay. So I do have to ask a follow-up question then. So how did this skill set come about for you? Is this something that you learned to say during observations, or how did you develop this masterclass, shall we say?
Yeah, I think some of it's through my own kind of learning in having conducted just hundreds of physician interviews. And I think, again, early in my career, I used to go through a questionnaire step by step. And I'd get to the end and I'd have a report, but I may not have the insight. And I think as I became more comfortable with that process, I would take U-turns, or I would take the fork in the road, depending on where the physician was going, and continue to learn, maybe not something that was on my roadmap, but something I still needed to learn. And then as I came into leadership, I think I just saw it again with early product managers that wanted to follow a recipe and wanted to check a box toward customer insights rather than, again, truly getting in the customer's shoes. I think one of the most fun things of my job in upstream and innovation marketing is when I can interview enough physicians about a particular narrow procedure or product concept. If I can interview enough of them, typically between 20 and 30, depending on how complex, and I can start to think like them. And that's the ultimate of a product manager, is to think like the physician. Again, it all depends on how complex the procedure is and whatnot. And we should always be striving to learn. But when you can achieve this secondary kind of personality that mirrors what you've heard from all of these conversations, there's nothing better.
Really cool. Okay. Excellent. Thank you. All right. And then how do you wish to be remembered after you leave this world?
Wow. I haven't thought about this in a while. I think, how do I want to be remembered? Obviously, for my family by leaving, a good family legacy. And also just, I showed up. I just put my shoulder down, did the best I could, certainly wasn't perfect, but I tried to just do the best with what God gave me. And it happens to be in the medtech world right now. And I think I'm uniquely gifted for where I'm at, but I still want to make more impact over, the next couple of decades.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And then final question. What is one thing that makes you smile every time you see or think about it?
Yeah, I guess I got to just go back to my family right now. I got 4 teenagers, and we're just in an awesome period of life. And I was traveling last week, and just being able to come home, see my wife, see the kids, I can't help but smile. So, my 2 boys are twins, are graduating high school, and those days are kind of short. So I'm just trying to soak up every minute of that right now.
That's wonderful. I love that. Well, this has been a really great conversation, Brent. Thank you so much for joining me today. We are so honored to be making a donation on your behalf as a thank you for your time today to Save the Children, which works to end the cycle of poverty by ensuring communities have the resources to provide children with a healthy, educational, and safe environment. So thank you so much for choosing that charity to support. And also, thank you for continuing to work to change lives for a better world. I'm grateful for you and for your impact on the industry.
Well, thanks for this conversation. I've really enjoyed it, and I can't wait to continue to stay in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
The Leading Difference is brought to you by Velentium Medical. Velentium Medical is a full-service CDMO serving medtech clients worldwide to securely design, manufacture, and test Class 2 and Class 3 medical devices. Velentium Medical's 4 units include research and development, pairing electronic and mechanical design, embedded firmware, mobile app development, and cloud systems, with the human factor studies and systems engineering necessary to streamline medical device regulatory approval. Contract manufacturing, building medical products at the prototype, clinical, and commercial levels in the U.S. as well as in low-cost regions, in 1345 certified and FDA registered Class 7 clean rooms. Cybersecurity, generating the 12 cybersecurity design artifacts required for FDA submission. And automated test systems, assuring that every device produced is exactly the same as the device that was approved. Visit ValentiumMedical.com to explore how we can work together to change lives for a better world.